It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Good morning to you. Thank you so much for being with us. Folks, welcome to the program. We have Mr. Trevor Burrus on the line. Trevor is a Cato Institute scholar. He is a research fellow in the Cato Institute's Robert A. Levy Center for Constitutional Studies and the Center for the Study of Science, as well as managing editor for the Cato Supreme Court Review. His research interests include constitutional law, civil and criminal law, legal and political philosophy, legal history, and the interface between science and public policy. Please welcome Mr. Trevor Burrus. Trevor, it's great to meet you and have you on the program, sir.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. So I wanted to have you on. I wanted to talk a little bit about this new guidance that the federal government is giving about nonprofits. You know, the New York Times, they call it dark money, that the U.S. is easing this dark money rule. What do you know about it?
Well, it's the greatest political salesmanship that I've ever seen. Just the term dark money, the people on the left really won some rhetorical points by naming this thing that no one really knows what it is, dark money. Generally, when we're talking about dark money, we're talking about a thing called a 501c4. So at Cato, where I work, we're a 501c3. We're an educational institution. We're not allowed to talk about, advocate for political candidates or for bills to be voted on or passed. But 501c4s are a variety of nonprofit organizations that can do a lot of some political advocacy and some education. It just can't be their primary purpose, cannot be political advocacy. And different groups can give to those, different corporations can give them, people can give to them. Some people can give to them for the purpose of political advocacy. So in 2014, the Obama administration said that those organizations' IRS forms, they have to report those donors to the IRS, which the IRS was not going to make public or anything. It was just this sort of onerous, unnecessary burden on these organizations. And what happened last week was that they simply said, you don't have to do that anymore. And they're talking about 2.9% of political spending. Everyone tries to convince you that dark money, quote unquote, is a huge part of political spending. It's almost nothing. And it's just the left's continued war on political speech that it doesn't like.
I think you're exactly right. It's political speech they don't like. There's also some First Amendment applications here, right? I mean, shouldn't I have the ability to associate with who I want to associate with, and I should be able to give them money without having to report that to the government? I think that when you have to report it to the government, it makes you vulnerable for reprisals. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And on many levels, that's exactly what the left wants. They want to be able to get this information out there. And again, I want to point out the real irony of this. The organizations are required to give this information to the IRS, but the IRS was not allowed to publish it. So it's literally not taking any information away from the public unless it gets leaked by the IRS or someone gets it out of there, which has happened before. This happened with the National Organization for Marriage. They had their donors linked to it, then threatened. And the real irony here from why the left is not on board with anonymous speech and anonymous association is that the main case that the right to anonymous association came out of is a case called NAACP versus Alabama from the 50s, where the state of Alabama claimed that it needed to know the names and addresses of every person who supported or was a member of the NAACP. And of course, in 1958, the reason the state of Alabama wanted that was so they could, put burn crosses on their lawn or attack them in other ways. The Supreme Court says you have a right to anonymous association, and now the left doesn't believe that anymore.
Wow. They don't believe it anymore, and I'm just wondering, well, first of all, let's make clear. What you said in your opening statement was that this was something that was new. And so the idea that Donald Trump is he's basically just putting things back the way it was. That we need to make that clear.
Pre-Obama,
yeah, it's pre-Obama. We need to make that clear because the left wants everybody to think that the president is some sort of tyrant. When in reality, he's restoring things like putting the census question on, or the citizenship question on the census, and he's restoring things like, hey, maybe you shouldn't have to give your donors to the IRS, especially in light of what happened with that whole Lois Lerner scam.
No, yeah, absolutely. There's just absolutely no reason. And we've seen it, the other states who are trying to shut down political spending, left-wing states, and of course they're not trying to generally shut down left-wing political spending. They're really going after right-wing groups. But other states have tried to use this. When Kamala Harris was the Attorney General, who's now Senator, but when she was the Attorney General of California, she wanted to get that information from the IRS, and so every organization that was raising money in her state had to give that information to her. And we have seen with Americans for Prosperity in California, they had some of that information leaked, and they had their donors actually threatened. And they were able to win a case in court because they were able to show that they're actual threats, which is kind of the standard now, which I don't really like. I don't think you should have to show actual threats to try and keep yourself anonymous. But it going with that NAACP versus Alabama case, the court had said, well, you show actual threats, so you have a right to anonymous speech. But really, here's a bigger question. What is the most famous anonymous speech in the history of America? It's the Federalist Papers. They were published anonymously because it's a rich tradition. Almost all the framers wrote anonymously and associated anonymously. No one wanted to know who was signing the Declaration of Independence. They were giving away their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honors. So it's an American tradition. And really just, the left doesn't like political speech in a variety of contexts unless it's controlled and adequately shame people. We see that, for example, with the Mozilla guy. If he gives money to an anti-gay marriage campaign, he's going to get shamed and fired. And I always just ask on the left, just flip this around, put the shoe on the other foot. You know, if your views were ones that were unacceptable in your area, if you're pro-choice in the South, do you want people being able to publish that you're pro-choice in the South and having all your neighbors hate you and all this stuff? They just never ever think about the shoe on the other foot question that is essential to First Amendment doctrine.
I'm seeing kind of in my mind as you're talking, we're talking with Trevor Burrus, a Cato Institute scholar, kind of a linear line of progression here. And it's kind of just dawning on me for the first time. And we have had some politicians here in Arkansas call for the disclosure of donors when when these groups across the state maybe come out with scorecards that they don't like, and that sort of thing. And it really, I've never thought that dark money and this whole dark money, you heard it from when the Citizens United case and everything else, and this phrase that they use. Fast forward, if you take the concept of dark money as they interpret it and you equate it with trying to silence opposition and not have a legitimate debate, you can really fill in the gap of what's happened. And now we get to Berkeley. Now we get to, okay, we have a conservative speaker or Ben Shapiro or whoever coming to speak on our college campus, and we'll just burn the college campus down because we don't even want to hear it. We don't want to debate. And so when you advocate against the First Amendment, freedom of association, I really like what you're saying here, Trevor. You're essentially equating it to you are trying to silence opposition and not have a debate, which is what we have always embraced here in America, is let's have a debate about the issues.
Yeah, and the number one rule when it comes to First Amendment is that when a politician is trying to shut down political speech, should be very concerned about the politician's interest in this. And it's one of the ironies that we had Harry Reid when he was still in the Senate, going out of the floor of the Senate many, many times and complaining about the Koch brothers, which it's just, I was like, where did all the cynicism go? This guy whose job is to run for office, and if he's a public figure, people can criticize him. He gets on the floor of the U.S. Senate, which is sort of a platform he has, the broadcast on C-SPAN, and complains about people criticizing him. And I feel like as Americans, we should be like, any politician, no matter what the party, if they come out and they say, I'm really going to complain about this group that's criticizing me because it should be illegal to make fun of me, or which at some points we have had laws like that, like the Sedition Act. Mm-hmm. The politicians, their biggest interest is in controlling their own message and shutting down people who are going to criticize them or calling them out in some way by labeling them dark money. The only way to have a really robust First Amendment and political debate in this country is to have participation be free and open, and if you want it to be anonymous, and have those rules apply to everyone at all times. Left-wing people can anonymously give to the Communist Party. Guess who was really into outing anonymous speech in the 50s? Republicans. They wanted to get all the people who were communists, and they wanted to make sure that their political giving was known. And so the shoe can always be on the other foot. And the only way to have this robust political debate, again, is to mistrust any politician who decides they're going to shut down or expose speech in the name of, quote, public good.
Mm. On your on the website here over at cato.org/research/campaign finance, it says this: by undermining competitive elections, campaign finance laws undermine democracy. Campaign finance reform distracts us from the real issue, the ultimate source of potential corruption, ubiquitous government. Government today fosters corruption because it exercises vast powers over virtually every aspect of life. It is any wonder that special interest, indeed, every interest but the general, should be trying either to take advantage of that or protect themselves from it. Can you expand on that a little bit, Trevor?
Yeah, so the problem with campaign finance, most campaign finance laws we have in this country didn't really exist until the mid-'70s. We had some other ones, some regulations on corporate giving, but not until the mid-'70s. And this was a very post-Watergate thing where they were worried about the cleanliness of government, and so they were worried about who was spending. And then we had a case. The ACLU was one of the plaintiffs saying that these restrictions on money are restrictions on speech. And that was the first thing where, going back to the skepticism about politicians, where you have this huge government which has a ton of favors and contracts and everything to give out. So one of the best ways of getting money out of politics is trying to get politics out of business and politics out of money. But if it's going to be involved in those things, you're going to see money flowing around, which is not necessarily a good thing. The hardest thing to convey to people when you're talking about campaign finance is many people just seem to think that giving money to a candidate or giving money to a political cause you believe in or spending it for your own speech is some sort of per se wrong. And that's not true at all. It takes money to publish, say, common sense, Thomas Paine's Common Sense, to try and change people's minds, to try and change the conversation. And you don't want that money to be controlled by politicians and have them decide who's allowed to speak because they have their own vested interests. And that's what we saw in the first campaign finance laws, is that if you have self-interested politicians who are complaining about people criticizing them, they can't just pass a law that says you're not allowed to criticize me. I mean, they're smart enough to know that that would obviously violate the First Amendment. But they can pass a law that says you can't spend money or give money to an organization that comments on or supports a candidate within 30 days of an election. And that will support them. That will help them out. It will help out incumbents the most. Incumbents are, if you restrict campaign spending, incumbents are the most helped out. And here's exactly why. If you wanted to run for office tomorrow, or one of your listeners wanted to run for office tomorrow, and I'm not sure which the congressman is down there, but the congressman has name recognition, and the listener right now has no name recognition. So it's kind of like trying to start a business when the established business is in place. So what do you need when you start a business? You need startup money. You need people out there to give you $100,000 to get your campaign going so people can know your name, and whereas the person you're challenging already has that startup money. So if you restrict the spending, if you say, hey, I'm going to put a regulation on both me as the incumbent and the challenger to my position, and we can't raise more than $2,700 at a time, well, that's going to hurt the challenger more. And that's what we've seen since campaign finance laws came in. We've seen in many ways on the floor of the Senate, you have senators having said this, for the purpose why I'm passing this law is to shut down speech that's critical of me. And then we see an extremely high retention rate of incumbents. It's almost impossible to get an incumbent out of office. And if you really want to talk about what corruption is, it's government in this town, the swamp that never, ever gets drained because it's almost impossible to raise enough money to get someone out of office.
Wow. Yeah. I really, really appreciate those points, and I hadn't thought of that. I've talked about the power of incumbency before, but never in the context of the campaign finance laws and the limits on giving. But you're exactly right. I mean, there's a lot of businesses or successful business owners who see what's going on in Congress, and they might want to finance one of those and give a big lump sum, but they can't do that. I've never thought of it before, but you're exactly right. That really would. And it makes sense, Trevor, because Congress has such a terrible approval rating, and yet we reelect. Well, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's a very, very high percentage every 2 years.
95%, 90 to 95%.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah. And it makes our political discourse stagnant. You can't have people come in and shake it up. And when you do have people come and shake it up, it's people like Donald Trump or Ross Perot back in the day who are wealthy, who can spend their own money on their campaign, but they can't give that money to someone else.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, and certainly Donald Trump, President Trump, it definitely makes your point, because he is if anything, I mean, say what you want, he is anti-status quo. He has shaken things up. I mean, the Republican establishment will now actually, disagree with the president now. You know what I mean? You used to never see that. He's in. Obviously, the Democrats can't stand him, but I mean, I think what he's doing is fantastic personally. But that makes your point. Here's a guy who's not the status quo, and you see how he's shaking things up, and it's because he was able to control the amount of money he personally put in his campaign. And anyway, I'll give you the last word. Trevor Burrus with the Cato Institute. I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, that you want to shake it up, and it also applies to the left. You're trying to communicate to the left. One person who shook things up in 1968 was Eugene McCarthy, who got big campaign donations before they were made illegal, and he was able to challenge Lyndon Johnson for the Democratic primary and on the issue of the Vietnam War and change the political debate in Washington. Campaign finance laws really clamp down on the diversity of that debate and the ability to get this town changed over to be more representative of the people.
Wow. I appreciate it. Trevor Burrus, Cato Institute scholar. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to meet you, and I hope you have a great day.
You too. Thanks for having me.